My name is Dr. Onkar Sahota. I'm a local GP and also a member of the London Assembly, representing Ealing and Hillingdon, and I chair the Health Committee for the London Assembly. My address is 20 Church Road, London W7 1DR.
Could you please turn to volume 5, which you should find in front of you? I think it might be the one on your right there.
Yeah.
If you turn to page 1745, you should find your submission.
Yeah.
Can you confirm that that's true to the best of your knowledge and understanding, and that you wish it to stand as your evidence for the Commission?
I do confirm it's correct.
Now, can I just ask you first of all, you say you're a GP and you had 3 practices.
Yes.
Are those practices, can you help us with what areas they cover? Are they similar or different demographics, or what exactly?
2 practices are in Hanwell and one is in Southall.
And what is the sort of constituents of the populations? Do they differ from one another, or are they very similar?
The population in Hanwell is probably about 30 to 40% of Irish ethnic origin, and in terms of BME community it's about another 30%, whilst in Southall we have a largely BME community, mostly from the Punjab. Probably about, I think, 90% of patients there are from the Punjabi community.
So do you feel your experience in those 3 practices gives you a wide knowledge of patient needs across the borough and the region?
I do indeed, and particularly as I've been working here since 1989.
And you also have a second hat as in your role at the GLA.
Yes.
Again, do you feel that gives you a broader overview as well?
Well, being a member of the London Assembly, of course, I represent a huge area itself, something a population of 600,000, but also as I chair the Health Committee of the London Assembly, I get an opportunity to look at issues right across London.
Now, first of all, dealing with the consultation process. Now, you make mention, it's at paragraph 11 of your document, to the consultation being limited. Do you therefore say that your patients were or were not properly consulted?
I think when the consultation process was originally started, and let's not forget that Ealing Hospital geographically sits in Southall, with a population there about of 80% are from BME communities, for whom the first language is not English, large proportion of them, they can't read English. So when the BSF document originally came out, it was only found in 1 or 2 libraries. It wasn't available in the various languages of the local community, and it was a very complex instrument, a very complex document. So there was a lack of consultation with the patients, given the time limits, given that they couldn't get access to these documents in the languages they could be comfortable with. And in addition to that, the response document was very, very complex. I mean, you would give the will to live right by going through it. It was so complex, and also all the questions led to one conclusion. And the other thing, of course, which you need to remember, is communities were being played up one against the other. For example, you could save Ealing Hospital, or you could save West Middlesex, or you could save Central Chelsea, Westminster, or St Mary's. So the communities was divided up. One trust was being placed against another trust. So people were very torn apart, and particularly the doctors in Ealing were very torn apart.
Could you just pause there and explain a little bit more about what you could describe as the setting of one trust against another?
I think that, for example, the choice was given that if Ealing Hospital was to be a major hospital, then West Middlesex couldn't be a major hospital. If Charing Cross was going to be a major hospital, then Chelsea Westminster couldn't be a major hospital. So people living in Charing Cross would obviously vote for Charing Cross. People living around Chelsea Westminster would vote for Chelsea Westminster. People living around West Middlesex would be voting for their hospital. So the communities were divided up, and the consultation was going to be taken all collectively right across the areas. So no clear opinion would emerge right with the way the community was being divided up. And I also think that different trusts responded differently to the consultation process. They were trying to fight for their own survival, and the way different trusts encouraged people to respond in different ways, and that was also apparent in the consultation process.
Now, you refer in your document to a survey of GPs. Could I ask you please to just pick up volume 2, which you see in front of you? I'm going to take you to, it's the letter from Dr. Palmer, the chair of the CCG.
Yes.
If I could ask you to look, please, at page 594.
Yes.
Now, at the bottom of that page, and we've referenced this before, Dr. Palmer refers to feeling that the issue, and this was in relation to the A&E services, acute hospital care, was so important and sensitive to the needs of Ealing people, we took the unusual step of issuing a referendum on the changes.
Yes.
When she refers to the referendum, when you talk about a survey, is that the same thing you're talking about?
I think so, yes.
Can I ask you to comment, please? Take a moment just to read that paragraph. Can I ask you to comment on Dr. Palmer's analysis of that exercise, please?
We felt this was so important. Yes, I'd actually have the survey in front of me. The exact figures, right? I mean, she's right that of the people who responded, and of course, the response rate was 41.6%. 58.4% didn't respond. Of this responded, the 68% felt that there was a case for change. But then option C, where Ealing Hospital was to be retained, 54.2% of the GPs who responded said they want Ealing Hospital to be saved. I have the document here.
I wonder if you'd be good enough to provide that for the Commission, because I don't know that that's a document that we have.
Okay, I'm happy to.
So, on the basis of what you have just said, can you help us to clarify whether or not you consider the analysis as set out by Dr. Palmer is correct or incorrect?
I think her analysis, as far as they go, is correct, but he's been selective, right, in not giving you the whole figures. It would have been more helpful if she had said to you, this is how the various options were responded upon by the local GPs. And clearly, let's not forget, the GPs around Ealing Hospital, that's Southall, were the ones who responded the most. They were most concerned about what's happening. And that's what I was talking about, the whole community being divided. If people were living towards Acton, they were more concerned about Charing Cross and Hammersmith. If you were living around Southall, which is the most deprived area of the borough, then you're more concerned about Ealing Hospital. Those GPs responded, and a primarily large proportion of the GPs wanted Ealing Hospital to be saved. As is apparent here, the 54.2% of GPs who responded wanted Ealing Hospital to remain a major hospital.
Now, can I ask you as well to expand a little on your view? You describe the configuration as ambitious and untested, and you say that the system needs resilience and capacity before shutting any acute services. Can you help the Commission with your view of the impact if that resilience isn't there?
When I said that look, in North West London, we have got 9 A&E departments, and what Chef proposes is to close 4 of them. They wanted to close Ealing Hospital, A&E, the one at Hammersmith, Centre Middlesex, and in Charing Cross. And in addition to that, they are proposing to close the inpatient beds at Charing Cross and Ealing Hospital, which is about 900 patients, so 900 beds. So far, we've had a closure of the A&E department at Centre Middlesex and one at Hammersmith. And of course, they will say that Centre Middlesex was unsafe because they couldn't recruit the doctors to man it there, and the nurses weren't available. That's why they closed it down, because it's unsafe for them to do so. But as a consequence of closing down, the pressure it put on Norfolk Park was that Norfolk Park broke the 4-hour wait every week in the last 1 year. It was the worst performing hospital in the country. And when you ask them why did this happen, and as I didn't ask them at the Health Committee hearing, we were told that the number of sick patients has increased. But if you look at the data of the type 1 cases arriving in Norfolk Park, that's the people who were very unwell, that has not increased at all. What has increased, of course, is the number of people attending Norfolk Park Hospital, and they can't cope with the pressure. And so, by closing A&E departments in a community without replacing alternative services, you will put pressure on the A&E service. And the A&E departments are the barometer of the health service in any given area. That's where the pressure point is initially. And when GPs can't cope, when patients can't get appointment to GP practices, when they don't get the advice that they expect from the 1-1 service, they will attend to an A&E department, which is trusted, safe, and they know they will get some care. And that's what's happening.
Now, Dr. Palmer also sets out a list of initiatives of community care which are either in place or in train, and that's 593 and 594 of that document. Are you not in any way reassured by what is said there, that resources are being committed and progress is being made, and if you're not, why not?
Yes. Well, look, you can draw up a plan for anything on a piece of paper. The real test is how does it play out in reality and what happens. Increasingly, I know that GPs are working in networks. That means that they want to get together and provide services. But what's holding them back is the infrastructure, is the premises. And what's the other thing that's holding them back is staff. It's getting more difficult in this country to get a GP appointment, but even more difficult to begin GP. We are dealing with a London Borough of Ealing, which is a large proportion of single-handed and two-partner practices. We have 82 practices in the borough serving the population, and I think majority of them, about 40% of them, are one-handed, single-handed or two-handed. In London, we have a recruitment and retention crisis. So the real issue is that there's you can create all the networks you want to, but the buildings aren't there to give the care to patients, and that there aren't enough staff to deliver that care. And I don't perceive any benefiting to the patients at all. Patients are still struggling to get a GP appointment. Patients are still struggling to get the care they want. And let's also not forget that the complexity of the patient going into general practice is now also increasing. When we had a 7.5-minute appointment about 10 to 15 years ago, the gold standard was a 10-minute appointment with a GP. Now 10 minutes doesn't give you very much consultation at time at all. There's 2-3 minutes to say, hello, how are you, what's happening? Then looking at the records, listen to what they have, you examine them, you diagnose them, and then issue a prescription or a further treatment. In 10 minutes. But you're dealing now with much more complex patients who have diabetes, which have been discharged into the community, people with rheumatoid arthritis, came to the community, hypertension. So complex patients come into the community, and they are not being handled, can't get the time to be seen. So I think these provisions are there on paper, but I don't think they are effective at all, and they're not having no impact on patients. If you ask the patients, have they noticed anything, they'll say it's got much more difficult to get the care we want.
Now, thinking about, you make some specific observations about Southall in terms of deprivation and morbidity rates.
Yes.
How straightforward do you say it will be for members of that community to obtain treatment, both acute and planned, if Ealing Hospital is reconfigured in the way that is proposed?
Well, Ealing Hospital, as I say, is geographically in Southall, and it's the west, is the borough, the towns of Hanwell, the towns of Southall, which rely predominantly on it. I mean, you talking about maternity services. 50% of the patients who go to Ealing Hospital for maternity services come from Southall, Hanwell, Lady Margaret Ward, Domuswell Ward, South Broadway. They're one of the most deprived wards in the country. And these patients have great difficulty using public transport. They have great difficulty in making their way around. And Ealing Hospital is so accessible, so near them, and who understand their problems. They have an expertise in dealing with the communities which they serve. And if this hospital is closed, they won't have access to these services. And public transport will be very difficult for them.
Now, in terms of the population, what do you say is the impact of the proposed reduction of bed spaces on what appears to be, and you correct me if I'm wrong, what appears to be an increasing population?
Well, I think that the premise of this calculation may be based upon maybe also inaccurate. We were all surprised at how rapidly the population of London is increasing. By 2025, the population of London will be 9 million. By 2035, the population of London will be 10 million. London is a great city growing very rapidly. We are being stretched in terms of our education system, public transport, and by hospitals. So I think the premise that they have the capacity to deal with is based on a false premises. That's one thing that one needs to test out on what the population basis. And secondly, I think that patients are getting much more ill, they have much more specific needs. What we do need to do is a huge investment in primary care, in the community services. If you were ever going to think about closing your hospitals down, in the current model, it doesn't operate at all. You wouldn't be able to give the care to the patients.
Now, thinking about the specific concerns you raised about the A&E, as a GP who presumably refers patients or has liaises with A&E, what's your understanding of what the reconfigured service will provide?
Well, of course, one of the things they talk about is when you ask the Secretary of State, who keeps saying that the A&E will not close down Ealing Hospital. And then they talk about type 1 and type 2 A&E. So I'm not really sure when an A&E is no longer an A&E. Certainly what they propose at Ealing is that they will not be able to accept blue lights, and there certainly will not be any intensive care beds there, so no real sick patient can come there. The other thing they propose is that the urgent care centre, which is a GP-led model of care, would still exist on that site. Now currently, 28,000 patients every year are transferred from the urgent care centre, which is on the same site as the current A&E department, to the A&E department. So these are sick patients who need specialist care or investigations, which the urgent care centre can't deliver. If you remove that A&E department from the same site, those patients will need to be transferred somewhere else. That would add travel times, that would delay the treatments, and I think Julian Bell earlier on before me already talked about the confusion that exists in people's mind. When do you ring up? When do you go to type 1 A&E? When do you go to type 2 A&E? When do you go to an urgent care centre? I mean, when you're sick and your child is crying and you want help, you haven't got the time to sort out in your mind which is the care pathway you should be following. You want to go to the nearest place and be sure it's going to give you the best care, the care you need in a safe environment. So I think people will be at risk because of that.
And again, speaking as a GP who will need to know about the service, what information have you been given about how transfers between the urgent care centre and an A&E will be organised where it's required?
Well, I don't have any specific information about that at all. I haven't been given any information as a GP at all. But I certainly would they also say, though, that we've discussed this with the ambulance people and the ambulance, the refer on ambulance times. I don't know what the impact of all this is going to be, but this is going to be a huge impact on the ambulance staff, because there'll be sick patients need to be transferred to Norfolk Park. It'll have to be done by the ambulance crews. We already have a shortage of ambulance paramedics in London. We have 400 short paramedics across London. And I also have no idea on the travel times for these patients and the waiting times for the transfers. I mean, we're already hearing about babies being delivered at home because the ambulance can't get them in time.
So thinking about the transport then, first of all, the ambulances. Do you say that there will be an impact on ambulances which are available to be called by other members of the public because of the need for ambulances doing transfers? Have I understood correctly?
Yeah, I think the other, of course, impact, of course, is that when you increase the travel times, patients will call the ambulance as a choice. We already seen that the pressure on the ambulance crews has increased. We are getting more calls to ambulances than previously, and the question is, why is this happening? Is it that people generally are getting more sick, they can't travel to, or is it that travel times have increased to the nearest urgent care centre or the nearest any department that they choose to call the ambulance? So I'm sure, of course, that when you close Ealing Hospital, the pressure on the ambulance staff will increase. They will be called more to convey patients, and also it'll have an impact on the travel times. On the ambulances for the conveying patients from the urgent care centres to the nearest A&E department.
Now, with your GLA hat on, you say that there's been no consultation with Transport for London. Are you able to help with whether or not there has been any discussion about that at GLA level? For example, when I think it was Dr. Rainsbury attended in January.
The evidence at the London Assembly which we heard was when we were talking about transfers of patients from homes to hospitals because of apart from ambulances, there are other modes of transferring patients which we need to look at transport. But clearly what came evident to me that these travel times given in the CEF document were travel times by the ambulance crew, but no one had talked to public transport, Transport for London, or the travel times. They have their own tools and methods of assessing them, and they hadn't been consulted, certainly, before. And even now, only 3 days ago, I was at the CCG meeting, which is held in public, looking at the travel times for patients to travel from the maternity department, because they want to close their maternity department at Ealing Hospital. And they still have a travel group set up, which still hasn't reported. We're still looking at the evidence. And they still haven't made any assessment through Travel for London, Transfer for London, what the travel times are. So I don't know where they get these figures from.
Sorry, could you just clarify for a moment? You said that they're still awaiting the report.
I was saying that looking at the travel times from maternity services to Norfolk Park, they're still working on the travel times and the impact. So certainly, I don't know who they're consulting, but I get the impression that Transfer for London haven't been consulted, and certainly weren't consulted before the CEF document came out, where they were quoting some travel times.
And just briefly, while we're on that subject, can you just encapsulate what your views are about the plans for Ealing Maternity Unit?
Well, the plans for maternity units is they want to close this down. The argument they come forward is that they aren't delivering enough babies and then it's become unsafe, and they want to give a 24-hour cover by the consultants. Just looking in the broad sense, all this CEF argument is that we want to provide 24-hour cover to our patients, 160 hours a week, 24 hours, 7 days a week. And they also recognize the recruitment of doctors and nurses is difficult. That's why they want to put them onto less sites. But what they don't forget is that the ratio of patients to doctors won't increase unless you can recruit more doctors. The ratio of nurses to patients won't increase unless you can recruit more nurses. And what's driving them is their recognition on their part that they cannot recruit enough doctors, nurses. That's why they want to consolidate on fewer sites so they can provide the cover they want to. So the argument they come forward, right, look, we can't give 24-hour cover with consultants at Ealing Hospital, that is becoming unsafe, and that only 40% of patients choose to go to Ealing Hospital. Of course, the people who live around Ealing Hospital will choose to go to Ealing Hospital. That's almost 50% of their workload. People who live around Acton, they'll choose to go to Queen Charlotte. People who live towards the other part of the borough may choose to go to Hillingdon, but most people want to go to Ealing Hospital. And if you give them the choice, look, Ealing Hospital is no longer there anymore. Where would you go then? That's when they make the second choice. I, as a doctor, when I say to my patients, where do you want to go? They often say to me, we want to go to Ealing. Then they say, by the way, how's Dr. Sahota? Will it still be open in 6 months' time when I'm ready to deliver? So it's almost becoming self-fulfilling prophecy that when you threaten to take away an option, then the choice of the patients becomes much restricted. And I was astonished that they sell closing of A&E maternity department as an increase in patient choice. It isn't. It's actually a reduction in patient choice. They've been told you can no longer choose Ealing Hospital. And that's why they will choose to go to Norfolk Park or to Queen Charlotte or to Hillingdon or West Middlesex. But if you leave Ealing Hospital going, which did very well in a CQC report, and it delivers very good care in maternity, and they want to close it down, then of course patients will go somewhere else. But they're really reducing choice rather than increasing it, what they're doing.
And finally, you attached some graphs to your
Yes.
document. And these are, as I understand it, dealing with the problems with ambulance times.
Yes.
And so on and so forth. I wonder if you could just explain very briefly for the commissioners what those graphs demonstrate, please.
The purpose of those graphs was to show that Norfolk Park has failed in all its 4-hour waiting times. But that hasn't been because the number of serious patients has been going there, but the number of serious patients have remained the same throughout if you compare this year with last year. That the reason it's broken its targets is because of the increased workload from non-urgent cases who would have gone to Centre Middlesex or Hammersmith are now ending up at Norfolk Park. Their premise was we're breaking our targets because we're getting more sick patients. Doesn't hold up. That's what the graphs were meant to show.
Thank you. Those are the questions I wish to ask. If you wait there, the commissioners may have questions for you.
Yes, thank you very much. I would like to start with a question which relates really to the bigger hat you wear, that is dealing with Greater London Authority Health. Is it possible to say, looking across London, that the driving force behind the plans, as we've heard from one witness today and one last week, is financial and is linked to the PFI initiative? That's the first question. The second question is perhaps a rather fundamental question in terms of, and perhaps rather obvious, in terms of Ealing Hospital, situated in perhaps the poorest part of the borough, and I think you gave a figure of 50% of the maternity admissions there come from that part of the borough. Has there been an analysis of attendees at the hospital generally? In other words, never mind maternity, what about the rest of the hospital? Where do they come from? 2 points.
Yes. Well, first of all, I think that what's driving this must be the ability to they want to save money. They want to have £20 billion saving in the NHS. I don't think, look, the PFI has contributed to some burdens in the system, but we certainly don't think that spending £3 billion for a top-down organisation, which no one wanted, no one needed, right, has helped the NHS at all. £3 billion have been wasted of reorganising the NHS, and I think what the reorganisation has done is two things. One is, of course, is that we have got GPs now, and I speak as a GP, sitting across various parts of CCGs, looking at contractual arrangements. They've been taken out of the consulting rooms. They're sitting now on CCGs. And you know, these poor doctors, they're so busy in the daytime job looking after patient care. They're given a document by a civil servant. Thou shalt decide this. And if you don't make these decisions, there will be other people taking over. And those people may be called McKinsey's or Pricewaterhouse. So the GPs have gone with the worst of two options. Either privatize straightly, or we do some of the dirty work you do. But I think, in my own opinion, is that GPs should have said to the Secretary of State, you look after this baby. We don't hide behind our skirt. So £3 billion have been saved. The other thing that's happened, had been wasted. The other thing that's happened is that when you start putting services out to the private sector and to put contractual commissioning, you start defining services. When you put a contract out, you say, this is service I provide, and the ones outside, we don't provide. I'm now hearing increasingly from our patients that we don't provide this service. I'll tell you an interesting thing. Last week I saw a patient who'd had a telescopic examination of the knee called arthroscopy. She should have had a physiotherapy in the hospital, because that's the contract. You have an arthroscopy in the hospital, you give physiotherapy in the hospital. That's the contract payment they get. A month later on, the patient didn't get an appointment from the physiotherapy department at the hospital. She came to see me and said, Doctor, I want to go back to work. I haven't had physiotherapy. I rang up the physiotherapy department. They said they hadn't received the referral from the consultant. Can you help me? Now, my problem was this. I couldn't refer her to the hospital because they only take appointment referrals from the consultant. I couldn't refer her to the community physiotherapy service because the care had all been paid to the hospital. This is a fragmentation of care. £3 billion, more fragmentation. Stephen Dorrell, the chairman of the Health Committee, once asked a question: how much money do we spend on the transactional costs of the NHS? That means monitoring contracts, setting contracts up. And the answer is about 10 to 11% of the NHS budget is spent on negotiating contracts, monitoring contracts, seeing whether contracts are being put out. The local GPs in Ealing have to set up a NHS federation because the local ECCG is required to tender out contracts. Now, they recognise that GP services should be are best given the GP centres, but they had got them from a company. They waste their time. So I say, put the clinicians back to do clinical work. Let us lift up the morale of the nurses and doctors. We have 6,000 doctors short in this country. In London, we have 8,000 nurses short. We have 400 paramedics short. You can do all the planning you want to, all the regulation you want to do, but if you haven't got the doctors and nurses to give the care, you won't deliver anything at all. The morale of the NHS is pit bottom, and that's what needs to be changing. And that's where the money's been wasted. And secondly, the hospital. The majority, I would have thought 60-70% of patients which come to Ealing Hospital are from the poorest part of the borough, South and Hanover. And that's where they go there. They're convenient, and the hospital gives a grand service to them, and they know what these patients need. Do you know, I'm sure you'll get Dr. Sandhu talk later on, but Ealing Borough is the second borough with the highest of tuberculosis in London, and London itself is the capital of tuberculosis in Western Europe. We have a high deprivation areas being looked after by Ealing Hospital.
Yeah, I'd like to come back to the question of the referendum of GPs that was held. I mean, first question is, do you think if another referendum was held now, that GPs would be more clear on exactly how they responded to some of these proposals, and maybe with a more categorical question? So that's one question. And secondly, if you were given a blank cheque now to reorganise, what would you do as a priority to get GP services up to standard across the area?
Certainly. I think that looking at how this SHAF has played out and the implications, if GPs were given a option now, they would be much more knowledgeable, they will know what's happened, and they will come back in a much more stronger voice. They would want Ealing Hospital to be saved, even more than the 54.2% that responded last time. So that's my firm belief. People are very, very concerned about what's happening in Ealing. And certainly, of course, what we need to do is that we need to make a huge investment in the infrastructure of primary care. I have seen no new GP centres going up. The idea of GPs being put into one big building, 5, 6 of them together with a lot of LRs is a good idea. But I have seen nothing happen better. I've been a GP in the last 25 years in this country. Sorry, in this part of the borough. No investments taken place. Certainly nothing has happened since SHAF came up. And what we have had is exactly a reduction in the budget spent in general practice. 90% of consultations in this country take place in general practice. And yet only 8% of the NHS budget goes on in general practice. I certainly think we need to start putting a huge investment in our premises, and we certainly need to increase the number of doctors and nurses so that they can give the time of care given to the patient and lift the morale up. And the reason the morale is low is because they can't cope. The workload is so much there. And by closing hospitals down, closing down services, you're adding to that pressure. So I think we need a huge investment. And I think the other thing, and I agree with it entirely, we do need to link up social services, GP services, community care and hospitals into one organisation so they work collaboratively rather than as barriers. At the moment, hospitals can discharge patients in the community, but they have no idea what sort of care they're going to be getting, whether they can be picked up, and when patients are in the community, they don't know what's going to be looking after them. There's been a huge cut on social services. That's what is driving this, that patients can't be looked after in the community. They go out in the A&E departments, they get admitted, they can't be discharged back in the community. So I think we need to ring-fence social service budget and healthcare budget and integrate them and cut out the transaction costs. Let's accept to have the NHS is responsible for the care of its patients without going to the market forces. Let's deliver a coordinated healthcare, publicly funded, without going to the private sector, and let's make sure that we don't negotiate contracts between providers, but we make sure we give the care the patient need in one continuous organisation.
In fact, actually, I think Dr. Lister may have explored, you may have answered what I wanted to ask, but I'll just add my 2 penny worth on that. In fact, I was one of Mr. Pound's lunchless GPs. I think rather guilty when we retired, from what you told me. But I want to explore why it is that GPs' views have been misrepresented, and perhaps how it will be possible to get a true view of what they think, because you must also be aware of the pressures that GPs come to in organisational meetings, and being perhaps felt battered as I was in large CCG meetings, having had delivered to my desktop the night before several megabytes of papers to read, with a full surgery, with results to look at that night, and a full surgery to do the next morning, and visits, and then get to the 1 o'clock meeting. Using one of my staff to hopefully have read the stuff and telling me about the meeting as we get there. And did you also have the feeling that there is now that the CCGs are led by a small group of very dedicated, very energetic GPs who are using most of their time in non-clinical matters? I'm not saying they don't still see patients, because I think some of them do the odd surgeries, etc. And some of them are very committed. And that the rest of my colleagues, and maybe I was one of them, tend to leave it to them, committed. Now, my fear is, if we are successful in getting this to go around again, how do we know that the 90-95% of GPs who are struggling just to get through the morning without killing anybody, and perhaps do a little bit of good while they're at it, how do you know they're not going to be steamrolled again? And my final thought is, and perhaps it might reflect why there have been relatively few responses from GPs, that there is a worry about speaking out. And I wonder if you've been aware of that. And I speak of somebody who was not frightened of speaking out, being older in the profession. In fact, in no respect, still been doing quite a few more years than you've done. We used to get past little messages to ask difficult, awkward questions, because Stephen wouldn't mind asking them.
Yes.
Now, have you been subject to those type of pressures, and are you aware of colleagues under those same pressures?
Certainly. Look, I'm very grateful for your insights into that. It's something which I recognise. Look, nationally, only 5% of GPs are involved in CCGs. Those were the same GPs who were previously on the PCG groups, were previously on the PCT groups. 95% of GPs aren't engaged in the process at all. And as you say, they're working very hard to deliver the contract, which is very complex and looking after the patient. Apart from seeing patient, let's see what the GP work is. It isn't just about seeing the patients. After they've seen the patient, they've got to deal with blood results, they've got to deal with the correspondence, then got to get some targets onto, and then they've got to cough things, then they've got to do their annual appraisals, then they've got a CQC visit. These guys are working very hard. And do you know, on a personal basis, the happiest day of my life was when I graduated, that I was going to be able to look after the patient I wanted to. The next happiest day of my life will be when I haven't saved enough pension funds to retire, because I feel so tired of the system. And that's the morale, not in my mind, just how I feel. That's how vast number of GPs feel. We know that last year, something like 5,000 GPs went to the GMC with a certificate of good standing, so they could apply for jobs possibly in New Zealand, in Australia, and Canada. These are people who are wanting to leave the NHS. Something is happening here. We are taking medical schools, students who are dedicated to work hard, who are dedicated to work hard at the A levels, work very hard at medical school. Then the system does something to them. And they say, why did I go to medical school? I agree with you entirely. And the GPs currently, you're absolutely right. The documents come on your desk 48 hours beforehand. Complex meeting document at the CC meeting, where you're told you must make a decision. It's a crisis. If we don't decide this, we'll have missed the boat. I know that our CCG even applied to join the co-commissioning, even before they'd consulted the members, because they were under a deadline. And then when they realized that they wouldn't be able to push it through, right, that's when they withdrew the application. So doctors are, when Dr. Palmer relies upon, so the GPs respond. Let's not forget that these are the very GPs who are working very hard. They're frightened. They might not get the improvement grant. They might get a nasty complaint to the GMC, or they might get let off at the appraisal. These guys are highly regulated, highly victimizing sometimes, and they fear for the very worst, and they're just surviving. That's what the the land is outside there. And for any Secretary of State to say, well, the clinicians are behind this, is lying not only to himself but lying to the nation of this country. There's no doctors behind this. The CCG have been given a choice. If you don't do it, then we'll have other alternatives. The Secretary of State is hiding behind GPs, and I just hope that someone will have the guts to stand up and say, we won't do your dirty work anymore.
Thank you very much, Doctor.
Thank you. Can I give this? Thank you.
Yes, if we can have a...